It is said that this is the most expensive original script in the history of film. In order to get the copyright of the film, the producer spent a whopping $4.5 million US dollars. What is more shocking is that in order to present the perfect script at the beginning of the shooting, the great and wonderful story, the producer spent a whopping $4.7 billion US dollars. It can be seen that the story in the film is really bad, and this film is directed by Denzel Washington. To this day, it still makes millions of netizens burn their heads and don't understand the god of brain burning, the time and space clue. So without further ado, let's get into it together. And the story takes place in Florida in 2006. At this time, it is the annual Festival of Madness. A group of Navy recruits and their families boarded a cruise ship to celebrate the arrival of the festival. However, what everyone didn't expect was that the ship exploded as soon as it left the port. More than 500 people on board were all killed. This incident immediately caused a huge uproar. In order to find out the truth of the incident, the government sent the Explosive Management Bureau and the senior detective Dow G to the scene of the incident. Although he has seen too many big scenes, he can see a row of highly burned corpses in front of him. Dow G still had an unprecedented shock. Then he picked up a piece of blue shard at the scene. There were also a few threads hidden inside. Combined with the thick smoke and smell of the explosion, now we can be sure that this is a terrorist attack created by a group of people. Back to the Explosive Management Bureau, his colleague told Dow G that a girl called him a few hours ago and asked him about his height and appearance. It sounded like he was in an emergency. After hearing the shadow, Dow G thought it was probably related to the cruise explosion, so he hurried back. But no one answered the phone. He had no choice but to send a voice message to the other party, and that afternoon, the police found a floating woman at the pier. The woman's name was Claire. Her body was highly burned, and her fingers were cut off. At first, both of them thought Claire was the victim of the cruise explosion, but as he checked the traces of glue on her mouth and the time when the body was found, the forensic doctor immediately erased his own thoughts. Claire was found at 10:40 a.m., and the cruise explosion was at 10:50 a.m. Obviously, these are two cases, but the experienced Dow G still noticed something. The two cases are only 10 minutes apart. This is definitely not a coincidence. Dow G boldly guessed that the cruise explosion was probably created by the murderer to cover up this murder case. And the reason why Claire was killed must have been a plan that the murderer didn't know about. So according to this analysis, Dow G decided to go to Claire's house to find out the truth. And as soon as he entered the door, he heard a sentence on the fridge. "You can save her." He suddenly appeared in front of Dow G. It was as if someone had already known that he would come. Then Dow G saw another advertisement on the fridge that said he was selling a car. In addition, he also found some blood-stained gauze in the trash can in the room. What shocked Dow G even more was that he found the phone call he had made in the morning. It turned out that Claire was the one who called him in the morning. So Dow G immediately returned to the Administration Bureau and told his colleague about this. Combined with the police's investigation, the murderer hid the bomb in the car in advance. Then he used a tow truck as a substitute to carry out the oil explosion case. And this car is very likely to have been bought from Claire. Dow G believed that as long as he continued to investigate according to this clue, he would be able to find the murderer of the explosion case. And while talking, Dow G noticed the car of his colleague Ross parked outside the door. So he wanted to call Ross to investigate together. But at this time, he was informed by the police that Ross had been killed in the morning oil explosion, and the body had been processed. This news was as heavy as a thunderbolt. It crushed Dow G heavily, because Ross is not only his colleague, but also a brother who died for the cause. While Dow G was still immersed in grief, a special operation team found him and took him to a military base. The person in charge thought that Dow G had super logical ability. If he wanted to find the murderer of the explosion case, he must need his help. According to the person in charge, they have a time machine that can look back 4 days ago. Combined with satellite monitoring, they can clearly see everything that happened 4 days ago. But this kind of dark technology cannot be fast-forwarded and reversed. All the details can only be watched once. The time will disappear forever. However, when Dow G carefully checked the picture 4 days ago, he unexpectedly received a call from his colleague. The other party questioned Dow G as an experienced detective. Why did he leave his fingerprint when investigating Claire's room? But after Dow G heard it, he was confused for a moment, because he clearly remembered that he was wearing gloves at that time, but he couldn't care about it now. At this time, Claire's figure appeared in the picture. But the strange thing is that he seemed to be able to detect that someone was peeping at him. Dow G tried to use a laser pen to take a picture of the screen. As expected, Claire also saw the laser. Then the whole base went out of power for a moment. When the light came on, Dao Ji made a big joke. He thought the police must have hidden something. After all, everything that happened just now was too outrageous, so he couldn't hide it. The staff had no choice but to say the truth. It turned out that this time machine was developed by Jiangqiao University. It can make 2 different time and space fold points. The common point is that it's like a piece of white paper folded in half. The 2 ends will overlap. It's just that their time nodes are just 4 days apart. And what they see on the screen now is not a video, but what really happened 4 days ago. Hearing this, Dao Ji was confused for a moment. He asked, since the laser pen can go through, why don't you just let people go through and stop the explosion? But the staff explained that the experiment had failed because the transmission of matter would consume a lot of energy. Just now, a laser was transmitted and the whole building went out of power. But in order to stop the explosion, Dao Ji still wanted to try it. So under his repeated requests, the staff finally decided to send a note with a clue back. As long as the note was seen by Dao Ji 4 days ago, it might be able to stop the explosion. And after everything was done, the building went out of power again. As soon as the picture changed, the note was indeed transmitted 4 days ago. But in this time and space, Dao Ji was not in the office. The note was seen by his colleague Ross. So he realized the seriousness of the problem. Ross immediately drove to the pier. He saw the suspect was about to be caught. But as he got up the gun, the first one to fall was Ross. Then the murderer stuffed it into the trunk and ran all the way. And Dao Ji looked at everything on the screen. But he was full of guilt. He didn't expect Ross's death to be caused by himself. But now he can't even be sad. Because this set of black technology has a limited range of observation, the murderer had to leave the surveillance range. Dao Ji put on the binoculars and continued to track the murderer. This binocular looks simple, but it can capture the image alone and is not restricted by the range. Under the strong power of the truck, Dao Ji was chasing fiercely all the way. But because what he saw was the picture 4 days ago, and what he saw in his right eye was the picture in reality, so this tracking was full of challenges. There were a series of traffic accidents along the way. But fortunately, Dao Ji adjusted his condition in time. With the hint from the staff, he didn't lose his target. In the end, he followed the murderer to a remote suburb. Dao Ji carefully entered the abandoned house. Everything he saw was a mess after the explosion. However, at this moment, he suddenly noticed a burnt mark on the ground. This seems to be the place where the murderer burned Ross alive 4 days ago. At the same time, the murderer's car was full of bullet holes. So he had to change the car again and carry out the crew's explosion case. And the advertisement that Claire sold the car was just seen by the murderer. So this is what happened to Claire later. Now it seems that Claire's death was caused by Dao Ji's intervention. But fortunately, there was nothing wrong with this operation. The investigation team successfully saw the murderer's face. Through facial recognition, the police soon arrested the murderer, and the man's name is Oster. Faced with Dao Ji's interrogation, he confessed his crime, and his motive for committing the crime was very simple. Oster had a military dream since he was a child. He was determined to become a naval officer. However, his request was rejected by the military. So out of revenge, he blew up a cruise ship that was full of navy. In addition, Oster also said a wise saying, if someone wants to change his fate, it can only be a dead end. And if you want to stop fate, you can only speed up its occurrence. But Dao Ji was confused. Obviously, at that time, he didn't really understand the meaning of this sentence. Then he left the interrogation room. As of now, the case is clear. It is reasonable to say that Dao Ji has also finished his work and can return to the office. Looking at Claire in front of the screen, Dao Ji suddenly made a bold decision. He actually wanted to send himself back 4 days ago to prevent the explosion from happening. At the same time, in order to save Claire. But his idea was severely persuaded by the staff because the danger of this action is quite high. Once failed, what will be sent back will be a corpse. But after listening to the staff, Dao Ji still insisted on his decision. Then he entered the space-time machine without hesitation. Then the lights suddenly went out. Dao Ji was sent to a hospital. The doctor was confused. Looking at the scene in front of him, although he was surprised, he could only hurry to rescue. And when Dao Ji woke up again, there was only 2 hours left before the explosion. So he drove an ambulance and rushed out of the hospital. He went straight to the abandoned house. Then the picture turned. At this time, Oster has already taken Claire's car and is ready to kill. Claire resisted desperately to escape the shackles and caught Oster's face. This move completely angered Oster, so he picked up a scissor to cut off Claire's 5 fingers. At the critical moment, Dao Ji rushed in by car, and Oster shot at him in an instant. He hit Dao Ji's shoulder. Then he unexpectedly detonated the gas pipe. Then he hurriedly escaped the